No so-called quote-unquote Holocaust denier or historian has been able to show that these reports are fakes, that they are manipulated. Is the authenticity of the Einsatzgruppen reports beyond any reasonable doubt?
Yes, that is quite true. We have to take up the question of the Einsatzgruppen for various reasons. We come later on to the gas chamber issue. So it's very important to be sure about the Einsatzgruppen reports. And that the deniers would also know. Already in 1976, Professor Butts, on page 200 of his book, deals with this question, knowing that it's very, very important. And he concludes, giving just a few examples of these reports. He says that their content is ridiculous. And he concludes they were manufactured by Moscow. What are these Einsatzgruppen reports, to be sure? Some 2,900 pages with the letterhead of Reinhard Heydrich, the chief of the Einsatzgruppen, found in Berlin in the Gestapo headquarters at the September, I think, at the end of 45, late fall of 45, but only the importance only being recognized later on next year, and then forming the basis of a case against the Einsatzgruppen members. Okay, now Mr. Butts says that they were manufactured by Moscow. And you would expect when he says so, in 1976, he had good reasons for doing so. He gave only one reason, saying something like they are obvious forgeries, look what they contain, a police report wouldn't contain this and that. But if you look closer into the matter, German courts have checked this issue very carefully. At one point, we now face the thesis of Professor Butts, saying they were manufactured by Moscow. As it actually turns out, that Heydrich established an office in Berlin in the summer of 41 to deal especially with the reports that came in from the four Einsatzgruppen. There came in almost daily reports by radio, by courier, and otherwise from the Eastern Front. And there was an entire office to edit these reports into collected reports, giving you a survey of what went on. These reports were made in a certain number of copies and distributed to various German offices, ministries that had to be informed about what was going on.
Did Hitler himself receive?
On the 24th of July 42, which is an interesting, which we can quote here, he says that he has just been informed that Lithuania was now Judenfrei, free from Jews. On the same day, he confirmed that the number one enemy of National Socialism was Chaim Weizmann, who had declared war upon the Germans in September 39. So here you actually have the picture. Constantly in his table talk, Hitler is focused on the Jews and the war that they had declared on Germany several times. And it is very, very clear, almost on every page of his table talk, that he simply hates the Jews. And there's simply no doubt about it. Even the most gruesome treatment of the Jews, says Goebbels one place, is too mild, says the Führer. So there is no, you asked the question, could it be that he's just kidding or just empty talk? No, because the murders actually do take place, and the main documentation would be the 2,900 pages of the reports, which therefore deniers either say are not authentic, or another denier would say, yes, it's true, but there were only 3,000 Einsatzgruppen members, so they could kill a few, mainly partisans, but certainly not hundreds of thousands of Jews. That's impossible, ridiculous, said one denier. But he forgets something. He forgets that the 3,000 members of the Einsatzgruppen, of which many were typists or had to do work in the kitchen and so on, fix the motorcycles, 20, if not more, members of the Ordnungspolizei helped the Einsatzgruppen, and somewhere between 20 and 40,000 local Ukrainian and Lithuanian volunteer police also helped the Einsatzgruppen. So we are not talking about 3,000 or 1,000. We are talking about 40, 50,000 people being engaged in the mass murder of the Jews. So here you have the one denier said there was no weapon of mass destruction. We might say to him, no, not one weapon of mass destruction. But how many do you want? 30,000, 40,000, 50,000 weapons of mass destruction. And the order, well, the order is proved by the fact that it happened, and Hitler never protested, and by the fact that Himmler and Heydrich again and again refer to an Hitler order.
So the strongest proof that there was a Hitler order to physically exterminate the Jews, if you should list the five best, the most convincing evidence for the existence of a Hitler order, what would that be?
You want five.
How many you choose? But the most important, the ones that cannot be questioned.
Yes.
All right, it would be, it happened, and it could not happen without Hitler knowing it. Assuming that it happened without Hitler knowing it, it would almost mean that Hitler was one of the most ignorant persons in the Third Reich, and one of the most lame and incapable people. If he was knowledgeable about the mass exterminations taking place, if he approved, this would be much the same as an order. But if he was sitting there and saying, it's awful what's happening to the Jews, but I can't do anything, I wish I could do something, that would mean that Himmler and Heydrich were much stronger personalities than Hitler. There's no evidence whatsoever that Himmler or Heydrich could run Hitler, as it were. So that would be one argument. And of course another argument would be that all the words of Hitler from the Mein Kampf, even earlier, the most important, the Jews are a pest, the Jews are parasites, the Jews are responsible for the war, I want to exterminate them. We would then get the picture of Hitler who thought so of the Jews, but on the other hand, when he had the opportunity, and he certainly had the opportunity during the war, did nothing. So there must have been an order, otherwise Heydrich and Himmler would have been lying, otherwise the mass graves, the mass shootings are all a mirage magic. So it is quite sure that there was a Hitler order, and of course, if you ask for a Hitler order, as some deniers do, they're tricky. Because of this, this demand presupposes that it is reasonable to expect a written order. But it was not reasonable to expect a written order in those days. There are numerous cases where important, significant orders were given by phone or orally. Axel von dem Busche, one witness, a Ritterkreuzträger, in one interview explains this very nicely, that if you say that such an order should have been given on paper, you just display your deep ignorance of how things worked in the Third Reich. In his table talk, Hitler now and then just says things like, Ich habe dem Reichsführer SS Weisung gegeben. I gave Himmler the order to do and so and so. It's not on paper, it's just now and then Hitler would say, Reichsführer do so and so, Reichsführer do so and so. And in 1941, Himmler again and again traveled to this and that, this or that police officer, and gave this and that order. We have, in some cases, so it was not supposed to be something you talked about. We easily understand why. We have some nice exceptions to this rule. That is in July, at the end of July 41, Himmler had visited two high-standing SS officers, Bakselewski and Fegelein, and gave the order to shoot all the Jews and drive the Jewish women out in the swamps. End of July 41. And this order was given to an officer in the SS Cavalry Brigade, Franz Magill, Magill. He was so disturbed, even shocked by the order, that he could not believe his own ears. This was an oral order. So he did something quite unusual, that is, going in a way behind the back of his superiors, he contacted Himmler directly and said, what is the order really? And then we get on a piece of paper from Himmler a telegram saying, Alle Juden müssen erschossen werden. All Jews must be shot. Not partisans or anything. Judenweiber in die Sümpfe treiben. Jewish women to be driven out in the swamps. And then there was a report back. It didn't work. Magill said that means that the SS cavalry had tried. It didn't work well because the Jewish women didn't sink deeply into the swamps. And then to be quite on the safe side, you want to read the table talk of Hitler from this very period, and then he himself speaks about driving the Jews out in the swamps. So we have Himmler ordering what Hitler has in mind.
You mentioned earlier that there were, in Hitler's private entourage, witnesses also that could confirm he had been talking about mass extermination of Jews or mass killings of Jews. Are there any particular people who are you thinking of when you said that?
Yes, there might be some cases in Goebbels, but on the whole, it is true that there are not many cases. But there's one case which is pretty good, and among others, perhaps it was Nolte who drew attention to this, namely Heinz Linge, one of the chief of the staff of the servants of Hitler, who one day, to his great surprise, overheard Hitler and Himmler talking about Massevernichtung der Juden, mass extermination of the Jews. To his own great surprise, says Linge, which indicates what we would expect, that it was not something you talked too much about.
So Linge heard Hitler and Himmler discussing
the Massevernichtung, mass extermination, physical mass extermination of the Jews, which is what we would expect, that Himmler now and then would tell the Führer how things are going.
You also mentioned Goebbels in this context. What are you thinking about? Did Goebbels say something that he had heard about Hitler talking about killing Jews, murdering Jews, and so forth?
Yes, of course. Goebbels was constantly in touch with his beloved Führer and wrote diaries explaining what he had experienced. And you might find there are 8 or 10 very, very significant passages that are perfectly consistent, almost sound like echoes of what Hitler himself said in public speeches. In March 42, for instance, there are some remarks by Goebbels which are very consistent with what we read in the so-called Wannsee Protocol about it will be a hard time for the Jews. He mentions the police and SS Führer in Lublin, not the name, but we know it's Globotnik, and it can be expected that some 60%, I think, of the Jews now will be murdered